Greetings, you turkey-stuffed, thankful, and maybe slightly less miserable accursed. Day after Thanksgiving Day here on the pod. Herle here with Kory, Jordan, and Scott. I'm sure we've got many heartwarming Thanksgiving hangover stories regaled with that turkey doze that happens. But Scott, couple things.
Mhm.
First of all, la-di-da, la-di-da.
The loss of Diane Keaton, the great Diane Keaton. Annie Hall, fantastic movie. Um, you ever see that clip? It's been all over the place this last few days from Manhattan, though, when she bumps in to Woody Allen and his 17-year-old girlfriend, cringe, at the art gallery. And she immediately begins to tear apart all of his opinions about what he liked and disliked at the art gallery.
Hmm.
I do think that to me is kind of a metaphor for, modern life and social media. It came 30 years prior to it, but I think Diane Keaton called it way back then. So loved her. You're a
Yeah,
big Diane Keaton fan, eh?
yeah. I am big Dan Keaton fan. A lot of my favorite movies of the 70s. Because there's a ton of Woody Allen movies plus
Are
those Godfather
canceled.
films. Um, Jays.
Yeah. I went to the game Sunday night. I went to the Sunday night game one. Started with a home run off the first pitch, and then we had to wait the entire other 9 innings for one other hit. It was a sad and depressing affair for a 12-year-old boy who arrived with a glove, looking for victory and triumph.
Kory, I know that you are roughly as excited about baseball as I am, which is to say not. But Jordan, do you got anybody in your family that's any kids or husbands or anybody that's into this Jays thing?
Yeah, my dad's really into it, and all I really know is that he came out just cursing a fucking blue streak about halfway through the first game, and it didn't get better from there. So, but I have kind friends who are into baseball who like know that I periodically need to talk sports things, and so they brief me. It's very generous of them, and what they did say, these friends, is they said to not let anyone complain about the Empire because you're just babies if you're doing that. So that was the important takeaway from yesterday's game, I am told.
Hmm. All right. Kory, did you get turkey?
Yeah, I ate a lot of different stuff. All the normal Thanksgiving things. Had a big steak dinner. Uh, Made potato pave, which was a team effort. Only takes about 24 hours to do, so that was a good one.
All the normal things.
These
Yeah,
sound like unusual Thanksgiving Day meals. Like I've had one Thanksgiving Day meal. It hasn't varied. It has a turkey.
That's it.
It has
yeah,
mashed potatoes and
we did
gravy.
that. We did
It
that on
has
Saturday.
it has dressing. Some lower class people call it stuffing, but in my family we were highbrow. It's called dressing. Um, and then some vegetables, which you don't pay much attention to. That's a Thanksgiving dinner. What are you having?
Well, we did all that on Saturday, and then
All right.
on Sunday it was steak and potato pave. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's meat and potatoes. You would like it. You would like it. It's just fancy French
Jake, in
potatoes.
this economy, Kory, my God.
All right, here's the rundown this week. Howard Lutnick, Chatham House rules in front of like 1,000 people. Howard Lutnick told the Eurasia Conference that Canada's auto sector should get in the back seat, if not off the road entirely, and let the U.S. drive. So we'll talk about that. Are the Liberals? I saw an article by Tondema Charles that caught my interest in the Toronto Star about whether the Liberals were about to give the NDP funding in the advance of the upcoming budget vote. And our cursed clipping is from Andrew Cohen at TVO today, who asked the question, why are Mark Carney's elbows down? We'll talk about the Prime Minister's strategy. And then Mr. Pinsett will close it out with our Hey Yous. I'm just going to put this out there. Maybe TELUS should have called it their Sustainable, Clean Canadian Energy Sovereign AI Factory. Kind of a long name, maybe a little unwieldy, but true nonetheless. I know when the concept of AI and data centers is discussed, climate-conscious Canadians are quick to remind people of the potential environmental cost of AI, which, if not properly considered, could be concerning. But sustainability has long been a core value for our presenting sponsor. So it's not at all surprising that they made their new sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, Quebec, sustainable by design. Most AI data centers are a strain on the electricity grid. If you've done any reading about the AI boom, you know that's putting it mildly. Well, this one has achieved LEED Gold certification for a high level of environmental and energy efficiency. It's powered by over 99% renewable energy, primarily clean Quebec hydro. That means 4 times less water is used when compared to traditional data centers, equating to 17 million liters saved per year. It all results in some pretty impressive sustainability data. Annual energy savings of over 10.5 million kilowatt hours compared to the industry average. 2,500 tons of CO2 saved every year, or enough to power 11,000 Canadian homes. And a power usage effectiveness, or PUE, score of 1.17, which may sound like an esoteric number, but it's far and away the gold standard in the industry. 26% more efficient than the global data center average. All right, we're done with numbers. I'm just going to beat the drum to close this off. We have an abundance of clean power in this country. We have the talent here at home. And now, with TELUS' sovereign facility at the mouth of the Rimouski River, Canada has the infrastructure to lead the world in secure and sustainable AI. Kory, let's start with you. You were there. Here's what the guy said. The guy said it sounded like maybe there was room to negotiate on copper and steel and aluminum because he wasn't as definitive. But literally, the guy said, we don't want to buy your cars. We see no reason why you make cars. You shouldn't be in the car making business. Maybe some parts, but basically, we're not going to buy your cars. And Canada, the Auto Pact, all that, that was a mistake. We're not doing that. And Trump is the president of the United States, not the president of the world. Doesn't give a shit about Canada. You should be happy to be second. I don't know why you're not smiling because you're second. But you're not going to make cars anymore. That's what I heard.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard a few more things, and I think they kind of build on some of the stuff that we heard at the White House visit. I think this notion that we compete on some things and we're stronger together, and partners on other things. Like I think that's what they're talking about, but it's very clear that they don't see autos the way that they've been seen since the 1960s, which is that's one of the things that we do together. To be more competitive against the Europeans and the Asians and others around the world. They don't view it that way. They view, I think, mining that way. I think they view energy that way. I think they view a lot of different things that way. And I think those are the areas where we're seeing more progress. But it's very, very clear they do not see autos that way. And I think that portends doom in the longer term for that sector. And I don't just mean that in a way that it's bad news for the auto sector in Canada, which it most surely is. I think it's bad news for the auto sector in North America, because this didn't get set up this way by accident. It got set up this way because of labor shortages in the U.S., because of labor costs. If you look at the involvement of Mexico back in the original NAFTA, that it was required all 3 countries in an integrated fashion to come up with something that was competitive with producers elsewhere in the world. And that's what we built. Since the 60s, we've built this highly integrated auto sector, which is, many other people have, I think, accurately described as us building cars together more than Canada building cars, Mexico building cars, the US building cars. We build them together. And the tariffs that Trump is imposing on the sector are hurting not just auto producers and auto parts producers in Canada and Mexico. He's kicking the living shit out of the industry south of the border in the United States. And that's at a time when it's facing probably the most competitive challenge to its supremacy since Japanese autos really took off in like the 80s. We've talked about before, BYD builds a car that's 150% better than a Tesla at 40% of the cost. There is a gap not only in pricing, there's a gap in quality. And it's really going to require everybody to marshal incredible efforts in order to come up with an industry that's competitive to what China's doing at the moment. And instead of doing that, you're seeing the U.S. dismantling its partners, trying to go it alone in autos at a time where I don't think that's possible. And now net, I would be shorting every U.S. Auto stock. It's like it's not going anywhere good.
Scott, this announcement by Leichnitz, this statement by Leichnitz, seems to have been met with some sort of ennui or it's not a big deal. Like it's not banner headlines in the Toronto Star every day about the demise of one of, if not the, on signature industry in Ontario. I know what the reaction in Canada would have been in January or February if the Trump administration had said, you don't build cars anymore, right? But apparently everything's different now. Like, I don't know. It feels to me like, listening to Kory, it sounds like we just accept this.
Well, I think two things are happening on that front. I think one, it's astonishing, breathtaking, and perhaps depressing how quickly the world, including Canada, adjusts its bell curve to accommodate the irrationality and the volatility of the United States, this White House, and the president. So the reason we're not screaming is you can't scream every day, and you can't scream every day for 6 different reasons. And yet Trump, with the flood the zone mentality, provides us 6 legitimate reasons to scream every day. And particularly when it comes to our self-interest in terms of trade relations, economic implications, the auto sector more specifically in this case, we have lots of reason to scream. But, where does screaming get you? And we did that for a couple of months, and now I think people's throats are tired. So we sort of shuffle through, and I look at what Leichnitz said, and I think it's worse than it appears, because I think that it means in direct terms, it means their perspective is we cannot have an integrated North American auto market. Now, I don't know auto sector. I don't know how that actually comes to be, even with the belligerence of these guys. I don't know how you actually repatriate all of these plants into the United States. I don't know how you maintain pricing, manufacturing. When Leichnitz sort of, kind of says, listen, if you guys want to maintain some of the auto parts, and that's up to you, but where auto plants get located? Next to the fucking auto manufacturing plant, right? Like, it doesn't make sense for them to be a squillion miles away. You're not going to say, well, let's keep the auto parts in Newmarket and have the plant be in Alabama. That doesn't really betray a lot of understanding of how it all works. So how all this is going to happen, how the dismantling is going to happen.
In fact, to your point, Scott, if I could just jump in, I was once in a meeting with Magna folks and Premier Wynne, and they said to her, you're not going to get another auto plant to locate in Canada, but you can't lose one, because if you lose one, the parts are going to go.
So when he offers that crumb of hope, it is actually an empty gesture, ill-informed at worst, disingenuous at most, at best probably. But I also think it offers us a chilling insight into the future of CUSMA. I mean, after them hinting that, look, we might prefer bilateral deals. These guys have told us over and over and over again, they don't wish to preserve multilateral trade arrangements. They think that works to their disadvantage. It weakens their bargaining power, and robs them of the ability to do what they wish and to exert maximum leverage. So, I mean, I hate to be such an Eeyore, but gee whiz, like, I listen to all of this and I think that means that they're going to do everything, notwithstanding the irrationality of it, notwithstanding the almost impossibility of it. They're going to do everything they can to dismantle North America's auto manufacturing sector as it exists. They're going to do everything, obviously, to move against CUSMA eventually. They're not interested in a review. They're not interested in waiting to 2036 to its actual full renegotiation. I think at some point they're going to invoke that 6-month abdication clause. That's that abdication clause. I mean, that's how it feels to me, unless domestic pressure builds, that the price of everything increases so much and the inability to deflect it in terms of political blame is so weakened that that the White House starts to feel like it has no choice. The last point I would offer is this, and it picks up on something Kory was saying. You know, every president in the post-war era has understood that their ability to influence world affairs and to manage geopolitical balance is not just a consequence of bullets and missiles. It's also the exertion of economic relations, the soft power. And that's not even terribly soft. I mean, it's pretty muscular, actually, economically, as we ourselves are feeling. They are abandoning the field to China. Nita Anand is going to India and China this week. These are countries where one of them ordered a murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. The other kidnapped 2 diplomats for 2 years. Our relationships are strained. Their attachment to democracy, the rule of law, and human rights is extraordinarily questionable. And Trump is forcing us into their arms because we are not going to replace the United States market by patchworking deals with Luxembourg and Costa Rica together. We must fish where the fish are. The fish are in China and India. Those are the large markets. So we have no choice but to approach some renormalization of relations. And that is incredibly awkward for us, but it's also a danger to Trump. And so then when China says, well, you know what, lift those tariffs on EVs and we'll actually lift the tariffs on canola. Well, Trump is the first to object. And it's like, hey, motherfucker, the only reason we're talking about this is because you have started to deny Canada access to the U.S. market. We have no choice but to deal with the trade-offs that might come with resuming our relations with China. And of course, the other piece of it is that he is permitting China to fill all this vacuum, not just with Canada, but worldwide. And so they are weakening their grip geopolitically. It is bad and stupid. And we are going to help. We're going to be a big part of its suffering.
So this is Thanksgiving week. In the American mind, Thanksgiving is a uniquely American holiday, big and secular and embedded in the country's foundational lore. In Canada, Thanksgiving is more understated, with a somewhat different but similar history, pointedly celebrated more than a month earlier. What Canadian has not grinned and told an American that no, Thanksgiving is over? It was weeks ago. And anyway, Thanksgiving is in fact celebrated all over the world. In Liberia, Thanksgiving celebrates the country's founding by freed American slaves. In Japan, Thanksgiving honors labor, production, and peace. Austria, Germany, and Switzerland all hold Erntedankfest, Harvest Thanksgiving Festival, in early October. In South India, it's called Pongal. Great Britain has a version, so does one of Australia's territories. The point is, giving thanks is a good thing. It's an act of humility. It's uniting. It allows us to reflect on good fortune and the fact that in Canada, we take for granted an abundance that much of the world cannot imagine. Our sponsor, CN, is thankful. It is thankful for its more than 17,000 Canadian railroaders and their families living in communities across a storied coast-to-coast network that literally helped build our nation and continues to move our economy. CN is thankful for the work those employees put in and their families who support them 7 days a week, 365 days a year, through ferocious summer heat and bone-frosting winter cold. Some of them were out moving cargo this week while their families enjoyed a Thanksgiving meal. That's the job. As noted, Thanksgiving is about gratitude for successful harvests. CN has been the prime mover of Canadian grain harvests for more than a century. It's thankful for having been able to do so. Canada is coping with turbulence and stress right now. This too shall pass, but CN and its railroaders are a constant. They will be there, keeping the economy moving, as they do, come what may. Thankfully. Jordan, do you have any idea what governments, what politicians are supposed to say to people who work in the auto sector right now? Like the general message from Minister Joly and others in the government is we're fighting for our industries. But I don't know if we're fighting for auto and whether we can fight for auto or not. It doesn't feel like we are. So what do you say to those folks in this circumstance? How do you
Yeah,
manage this politically?
I don't actually see them talking even about fighting for auto very much. And I think it was really notable in both Jolie's comments and the Prime Minister's comments coming out of the meeting in Washington last week, where they talked about the sectors where they are looking at securing these side agreements. Auto's not on that list. Of course it's not on that list because the Americans have been very clear that that's not their that that they're not looking to a resolution there. I think what both Kory and Scott have said about their intent on this is completely true. But the problem, the political problem for the Carney government is that now it leaves them in a position where they look like they are buying into it to some degree the Trump strategy, which is to divide Canada sectorally, and then choose the partners, choose the sectors that they actually want to deal with, and that others will be the losers in this. And there's a trap there for sure politically for this government, because if there is an appearance that they are trading one sector off for gains in another, that's going to have political consequences for them. And, I was struck by what you said, David, because, you talked about how if Leichnitz had made these comments in January, what would the reaction be? Well, fuck January. Remember like March and April? Do you remember when the auto tariffs first came in? Carney took time off the campaign trail. He went out as prime minister, stood beside Lana Payne of Unifor, and talked about a robust Canadian response to fight for those jobs. Where was one of his very last rallies during the campaign? It was at Windsor. It was at the Ambassador Bridge. It was all about preserving that, fighting for those jobs, preserving that industrial sector for Canada. And that urgency, that sense of we are not going to be divided in our response to the threat from the US is completely gone. And I think that this is a big risk for the government. And look, like the issue around China and the EVs, this is a really thorny problem for the government. But I think, you have to throw into the mix that the only reason that we have, or not the only reason, rather, the US is not the only reason that we have those tariffs, right? That's also to protect the investment that Canadian governments have made in EVs here in Canada. And that's to protect jobs in the auto industry here in Canada. So they have to weigh that in the mix as well. And there's really very little evidence, I think, in their communications of urgency around the question of the auto sector. And that's a big problem because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs here, and where we're going to start to see those losses very soon if things continue as they are. And I agree with Scott, like none of this actually makes any economic sense in the United States. But the problem is that relying on the laws of political gravity to rein in Trump's actions has been a failing strategy so far. It is not working. It is not working. He is continuing. And if we wait until the US midterms for any kind of action, we are not going to have an auto industry to speak of. And so I think you're starting to hear concern both out of the auto manufacturers. You're starting to hear concerns from Unifor that the government is allowing a kind of trade-off to happen between industries. And, if we think about how we talked about what the risks were of this trade war with the United States, like more than a year ago or less than a year ago, God, so much has happened in January, right? We were talking about this in Saskatchewan. And I think we really correctly foresaw that one of the biggest challenges and the biggest threats of this kind of a trade war in Canada is its ability to pit regions and industries one against the other. And that the key around federal leadership would be finding a way to do some burden sharing there and pulling people together and having a common front in order to confront that threat. Well, that appears to have gone out the window. There does not appear to be any attempt to really balance those things in how that's being communicated to Canadians and how that's being communicated to workers. And instead, we're actually seeing, I think, a deepening of those regional tensions and that zero-sum mentality that is really, frankly, very corrosive, I think, for us as a country. And for those workers whose jobs are on the line, there's really nothing they can look at over the past week that says that they are going to have some help or some reassurance. We've seen the government go out. They've made, for example, in the steel and aluminum industry, they put in some measures that were going to support workers who are impacted. We've not seen that in the auto sector. So there are big gaps, even if you don't talk about the idea that they want to save those jobs, even supporting those workers has not been front of mind. So I think this is a big risk for the government. And also it is a massive change of tune. It is a massive, massive change of tune from what we saw during the election from Carney. And I know we're going to talk more about that, but to me, this is it was really astonishing to see coming out of those meetings last week, absolutely no urgency around the question of auto at a moment where it is under maximum threat from the US.
What happened to the notion, Kory, I'll direct this at you, but I'm just meandering. What happened to the notion of retaliation? I mean, I know that I had a economist named Trevor Tombe on the Hurley Burley, and he said, we can't retaliate. We're a tiny part of their economy. They're a massive part of our economy. They crush us in a game of retaliation. But there was a lot of talk about that early on. And, it is possible, and it would be my instinct when somebody says to you, well, I don't think you should be making autos anymore, to say, well, I don't think you should be farming anymore. And so we're not going to send any fertilizer. And so, I mean, I suspect that might have some impact on the midterms.
Look, here's the fundamental difference there, because I think Scott and Jordan are blowing past part of what I was talking about in my initial comments, which is this is the Trump administration killing autos in the United States. Like what is the retaliation?
But they don't know that. They don't know that.
But and yet it is happening, right? So, like the notion that you can control Trump and the policies that he is going to impose, that he can do so unilaterally and is doing so unilaterally, I think is just flying in the face of all evidence on all topics with all countries. Like there are certain things that are up for negotiation, and there's certain things that aren't. And a lot of what you're seeing Trump doing on the trade file is, I think, self-harm. I think it's self-harm. I think it's in terms of geopolitical strategy and trade strategy, I think it's completely wrong-headed. When we talk about deals being made, the deals that are most being made are between other countries to limit their exposure to the U.S. market. Like he's literally driving countries into the arms of China, who is the largest threat, I think, from a trade perspective to the United States and North America and Western Europe in the longer term. And he's frustrating all of those friendly relationships that we should be deepening, including with Canada. But a few things. One, auto isn't going to die tomorrow, right? But you can see the life being slowly choked out of it on both sides of the border by becoming less and less competitive. Like this is ultimately what kills industries. The product that you can make is more and more expensive relative to better products offered elsewhere. Why do people not buy British cars the way they did once upon a time, right? It's having a car that's in the shop all the time that's more expensive than the car that isn't in the shop all the time is really bad for your sales pitch. And you're seeing a version of that going on. So, look, I'm not going to say there's never going to be cars made in Canada, but I would say, if we're to fast forward a decade from now, I think it's more likely to be a BYD factory in Canada than it is to be a GM factory in Canada, because of the decisions that are being made in Washington right now. So, yeah, but I'll answer your question more directly around, why don't we, withhold potash? Well, this comes to provinces. And we had this moment of everyone coming together to, fight the big bad Donald Trump and this trade stuff. And that vibe lasted for, I don't know, 4 months, 6 months, but like it's been slowly dissipating. And you're seeing, and I guess we're going to get to this later, you're seeing BC, back into its corner on pipelines, and you're seeing Alberta back into its corner on resource issues, and you're seeing Saskatchewan doing its thing and Ontario doing its thing. You're seeing like that sort of moment of coming together as a nation to fight in a unified fashion. Not that it was ever completely there, but it is way less there today than it was 4 months ago, 5 months ago. So, is it really a lever there to even be pulled? Like, can you block potash exports to the United States absent the support of the Saskatchewan government? I don't think you can if you're Mark Carney. I don't think you can. You'll tear the nation in half.
Right.
If you try to do that. And as much as, fighting the trade stuff is a top priority for, I think, any federal government, maintaining national unity comes first. It comes before that. And I just don't see a willingness there to go there unless you're seeing something I'm not.
No, I agree. I agree.
Well,
Yeah.
can I add one thing to that though? Because I think that is an obvious consideration, and it must be a consideration in the government's posture and why it differs from, say, the rhetoric of the election campaign. I do think there's one other factor, and that is we're not just when the topic of linkage comes on. Let's go tit for tat in terms of retaliation. It isn't just the argument that we will lose that fight and potentially we'll lose it badly. I think the other factor, so let's not deny them potash because that will end up, I'll go back. There's the additional consideration, which is Trump will not behave, based on everything we've seen, like a past U.S. administration in the post-war era. He will not simply respond proportionately in terms of back and forth, which we would lose, presumably, from an economic standpoint anyway. He will respond disproportionately. And so it isn't just about avoiding the consequences of retaliation and linkage. It's also about avoiding him exerting an additional extraordinary harm or inflicting it upon us. So I think you have to be mindful of that. You got to be mindful of national unity implications. But if we were to turn off the tap with respect to potash, I think the prime minister is sitting back and saying, then what would Trump's next move be? I don't
Shut
think
off line 5.
It wouldn't be reciprocal. Yeah, it would be like, all right, well, we're posting soldiers across the Arctic. So all that. And then I would just to shine one more explicit light on it. To Kory's broad point, I do think we were echoing your point about the space that's being created for China, and I'm terrified of it. And I don't think it gets much consideration. Trump is seizing the false pass by saying we can build all our cars here, but they must be combustion engine cars, and leaving the true future of EVs and where the world is going to China, right? Trump is seizing, right, fossil fuel production and coal, right? That false past of energy production and what it's going to take, and leaving available to China the massive investments they're making in renewable energy as grids are restructured and electrification is going to happen and is happening everywhere. China has if China voted, if the CCP fucking voted for a president, it would be Trump. That he has been the greatest geopolitical gift to their interests and the advancement of their interests we've ever seen. And it's severe implications beyond our own hollowing out of our domestic industry and wealth.
Yeah, although I think, Scott, the counterpoint to, what you're talking about in terms of retaliation is that dropping all retaliation, dropping every bit of leverage we have has also resulted in no change, right? Like we're not really further ahead. Maybe we're not
possibly
worse
has
ahead,
resulted in not experiencing
but
the harm we might have feared
sure.
otherwise. I mean, I know that's weak, but it might be true.
Well, but it is, right? And so the problem is how does the government advance things, right? And not just how can they deal with an intractable US administration, because maybe that's impossible, right? But it's also about how are they getting caught trying on the part of Canadians, right? Because right now, we saw this last week. They're going in. There's really very little communication about it. They've clearly told the Americans that they're no longer going to talk about these talks in any detail in public. So there's very little being signaled to the Canadian public about what's on the table, what are the stakes of these conversations, and what's the solution the Canadian government is bringing forward. And when you pair that with unilaterally standing down on absolutely every single measure we have that would be leverage against the United States, it does put our government in a very, very weak position. So I think, whether or not it's possible to avoid catastrophic outcomes with the United States, we don't know that, right? Because also Trump could wake up tomorrow and stick us on a list, and we maybe get those anyways. But the problem for the Carney government remains the same, which is that there's a huge divide between how they campaigned and what they told Canadians and what they're actually doing, and it doesn't seem to be working.
Climate policy and Canadian competitiveness. The two go together like the riders in Herle, in the sense that the success of the former dramatically affects the health and welfare of the latter. So on behalf of our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute, I'm going to lay out why good climate policy is so important for a more competitive economy. Particularly germane in the lead up to the federal government's long-promised climate competitiveness strategy. I hardly have to tell you plugged-in listeners, there's a rather uncertain trade environment out there. Diversifying our trading partners beyond the US means expanding markets for Canadian products in the EU, UK, China, and India. These countries, along with Mexico and Japan, are decisively transitioning to a clean energy future, introducing their own carbon pricing systems, in some cases carbon tariffs, and slashing emissions. So with most of the world moving to a future where clean energy and economic growth are mutually reinforcing, Canada needs to continue to prioritize strengthening our own climate policy and accelerating the kinds of nation-building projects that help us keep up. We've touched on some of the key opportunities here before. Governments working together for electricity interconnection is one of them. Same with the rapid expansion of our clean power. The Prime Minister talks of breaking down internal trade barriers to build one Canadian economy, and both are a fit. On the climate policy front, modernizing our industrial carbon pricing systems will drive more emissions reduction than any other thing we could do, for very low cost to industry and next to nothing for consumers. There's also this. Tens of billions of dollars worth of low-carbon, economy-boosting projects stand to benefit from the industrial carbon price. Again, mutually reinforcing. Plus, we need to finalize methane regulations in the oil and gas sector and enact our clean electricity tax credits. Much to do. You can find more detail on all these pieces on the Climate Institute's website, climateinstitute.ca. All right, so let's jump into our clipping and keep this conversation going, but the clipping is directly relevant, and it is from TVO, and it's Andrew Cohen, and among other things, he says, as Prime Minister of the country most vulnerable to this new protectionism, managing Donald Trump is everything. Angering him would be disastrous. So every day, in every way, it's a campaign of explaining and persuading, gently but firmly, without surrender or submission. Carney's long game has its critics. Many think he is weak and obsequious. The head of the United Steelworkers Union in Canada, for example, was disgusted by the warmth in the Oval Office because Trump's tariffs are putting his members out of work. Does he expect the Prime Minister to issue ultimatums? Should he suspend exports of oil and gas, cut off electricity, or threaten tit-for-tat tariffs? That may happen one day, but defying Trump usually ends badly. At the same time, Carney also faces accommodationists such as Goldie Hyder, president of the Business Council of Canada. When Hyder says we should listen more to the U.S. ambassador in Ottawa, who grouses about America's unrequited love of Canada, it sounds like appeasement. It's about managing the man. If he ends wars and reconciles treaties, Donald Trump will deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. If he disarms Trump and saves our prosperity, Mark Carney will deserve the Nobel Prize in chemistry. So, I guess the politics of this are, what are people seeing right now? Are they seeing a government that is saving us from the worst? I.e., does the general population understand that COSMA could be canceled at any time realistically, and that we have preserved ourselves a somewhat favorable position? Or are people seeing such a dramatic dissonance between what we were talking about mere months ago and now that they don't understand? But from a political standpoint, my feeling is that our governments right now have the population on a ride that we don't know how it ends. We're on a journey. We don't know what's going to happen here. And that really is, I mean, that's dangerous political territory, because normally you like to be assuring people we're going to take some hits here, but we're going to come out the other end and here's what it's going to look like. We don't know what it's going to look like.
We're getting some hints though as to what it's going to look like. Like clearly Cosmo's gone, right? Like, you know, if you're looking for other headlines, I think you spoke to it with the Leichnitz remarks and the many things that have come out of Trump's mouth over time. Despite it being his agreement, he doesn't think it's a good agreement. He thinks it's an agreement that he got when he had an administration that he had much less control over than he does the current administration. Trump 2.0 is very different than Trump 1.0, and that's a Trump 1.0 agreement, and he doesn't like it. So, we're going to have a bilateral trading arrangement with the United States. And there are some, areas where they're clearly willing to move, and there's some areas where they're not willing to move at all. And autos, if you were to look at all of the positions that Trump has had over the last 40 years, they've changed on almost everything except one thing, and that's tariffs, and particularly tariffs on autos. He is not going to move on that, is what all signs are saying. So, is it worth, blowing your brains out, in a futile effort to get him to move on something that he's clearly not going to move on? Or do you try to act in the larger interest of the economy, to preserve everything else that you can, and then focus on transitioning those industries into other things? Like we've talked about some of those things before. If you're making, pistons for a Ford F-150, you can make valves for a nuclear power plant. And, should we be looking at what we do in our manufacturing sector to make those shifts? And if we're going to be doing autos in Canada, maybe we should have a plan for doing BYDs over time, because the chances that we're going to have these companies still in existence at the end of Trump is very low. And not just in Canada, like once again, in the United States too. He is kicking the living shit out of the American auto sector. And he thinks he's helping it, but
he's going to beat them until they produce a Chrysler K car again.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're going to be back to where you're competing with a Chevy Aztec against a, Toyota Camry, and it's not going to go well.
Well, I think what's obvious emerges from this discussion, I think, is that the actual unspoken motivating core of our trade policy now is to preserve market access to the 85% of the US market that we currently have, or at least as much of it as possible. And so if that's your raison d'etre, that means that you're like, can we save CUSMA? If CUSMA can't be saved, then do we move into a world where they demand a bilateral deal? And how much of that 85% of the market can we preserve? And partly that's going to be by stroking the beast, and partly that's going to be by making certain that our efforts to diversify are done as effectively as possible without angering the beast. And so that seems to me to be the unspoken core of our trade policy and our bilateral policy with the United States now. And the reason it's unspoken is by implication, it does more or less mean, and we will try not to provoke his anger on other things. And I get what Jordan is saying, but it seems like it's aimed at in terms of, well, there's no guarantee that, by rubbing the beast's mane that you'll get what you want. He may still turn around and snap his jaws shut on you. But to anger him is to invite certain problems. And I think that's what's really going on. And therefore, it's unspoken, because if you say it out loud, you have to acknowledge that you're abandoning effectively autos and other critical sectors, steel and aluminum, that look like they're in deep trouble.
Steel and aluminum might be fine. Like I think that's more. I think that's more where you're going to see deals, because if you look at the amount of energy it takes to make aluminum, they don't have the power. Like, not only do they not have the workforce,
we'll see. And obviously there's something going, there's some kind of discussions. The only other thing I would add about Andrew Cohen's piece explicitly is when it cleverly ends. Like, it's too easy to write this piece. Like, as someone who writes columns, like, this is an easy piece to write. And the reason it's an easy piece to write is when it ends with that clever line of, well, if Carney can somehow sue the savage beast, and save our prosperity, then he deserves a Nobel Prize in chemistry. Okay, great. Hats off. Funny quip. But here's the problem. Cohen's whole piece is about praising the long game, but he never actually gets into, well, what is the long game? How does the long game get executed? And as our discussion is highlighting, no one really has the answer to that. And that's, because the best answer is, well, I guess we do everything we can to keep him as happy as possible. And hopefully he directs his ire at someone else, and we're able, through goodwill, and he decides, hey, you're one of the ones I like, that maybe we get to preserve as much of that 85% access to the U.S. market as we can. It's not a good bet, but I think what's happening is, the truth is, it's the only fucking bet that it looks available to us on the board to make.
Oh man, I think things are even so much worse than what Scott is saying. So much worse.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Excuse me, I'm
man.
going to turn my screen off while I hit myself
Yeah.
with a cricket bat until I bleed.
According to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, Canadians lost more than $638 million to fraud in 2024. Think about that for a second. Hundreds of millions gone to scams that get more nefarious and sophisticated every year. That's why our sponsor Interac is fighting back with some of the same technology fraudsters are using, including artificial intelligence. Interac's AI tools scan millions of transactions in real time, spotting unusual activity like irregular payment patterns or anomalies around sending or receiving money. Every suspicious transaction is reviewed by human specialists, which is part of Interac's multi-layered approach to helping protect Canadians' data and privacy. And it works. In its first year, Interac's newly implemented AI fraud detection program increased the number of fraudulent transactions found by an estimated 300% over the previous year. As Canada's payments hub, this is where they have an edge. Situated at the center of Canada's payment system, Interac collaborates with banks, law enforcement, and regulators to spot fraud and scams as money moves through the network. Fraud may be evolving, but so is protection. Canadians can trust that Interac is investing in advanced fraud detection systems powered by AI, backed by human oversight, and designed to keep your money moving safely and securely.
Come with me because look, like and Scott, I think you've described the current strategy exactly correctly, including the unseen piece, right? And of course, the problem with that is that that is coupled with an utter lack of communication with the Canadian public about what's happening, no sense of what the government is doing to try to actually safeguard jobs and standard of living here in a concrete way. And no, I'm not talking about large infrastructure projects that are going to take more than a decade to come online. That ain't it. That ain't it. There's nothing around that that's happening. We could talk about the fact that coming out of that meeting last week, and I think Jolie said this on CTV over the weekend. Well, what do you think was the big success of that meeting? Well, it was that we got Trump's attention. We're on the agenda. Like come the fuck on. Like this is absolutely going to be inadequate for Canadians. But the problem is even deeper because what we have right now is government that's pursuing a contradictory position as they go forward. It's not just all of the capitulation and the sort of cowering that Scott described, which whether it's the right or the wrong strategy, that's what that is. It's a contradictory strategy. So on the one hand, you have got a government saying, months ago saying that we are going to be lessening our dependence on the United States. We are going to be diversifying our trade. You've got Anand going over to China, to India. We're talking to the Europeans. We're doing all of these things. And at the very same time, they're pursuing another track that's going to deepen integration with the United States. Keystone is back on the menu. We're going to lock in resource export infrastructure to the United States. And I think to be very clear, if Trump decides he wants that pipeline, that will go ahead. And maybe it's a neat little trick for domestic politics for Carney. I do think it probably would be. But that's a huge problem. That's very contradictory to what he told Canadians he was going to do. Defense cooperation. We're going to go in, we're going to join Golden Dome. We're massively increasing our defense expenditure. And don't get me wrong, we're definitely going to do defense industrial benefits here in Canada, but the majority of that money is going to continue to go to the United States. We're deepening integration in all of these things at the very same time that because we are now playing into this sectoral divide and conquer that the U.S. is pushing in the trade negotiations, perhaps in the hopes of preserving CUSMA, we are now putting on the altar the auto industry. Probably we're going to put on the altar supply management. This is a huge, huge political problem for this government. And the contradiction.
But are we putting them on the altar, Jordan? Are we putting them on the altar, or are they put on the altar, and we have to decide what to
they're on the altar? Like it's not. It's
but we also make a determination about how we're responding on those things. And I think that the problem for the government in pursuing and agreeing to do sectoral side agreements is that you're saying we will go sector by sector, right? Like it's not a whole Canadian economy approach. And so this will lead them down to a place where those things are on the table and where they're going to be forced into some extremely, extremely politically unpalatable decisions about what is going to get sacrificed in order to get some of those side agreements or to preserve CUSMA.
That's not new though, Jordan. Like every trade agreement, including CUSMA and and NAFTA before that, and the free trade agreement before that, and auto pact before that, and on and on. It's their bilateral sectoral agreements or going through sector by sector is how all of these things go. Like that's not new. What's changed is the US's view as to where we cooperate and have a united front against the rest of the global market versus where do they view their national interest being. And like this is a change in a 60-year approach on autos from like we're going to do it together to we're going to do it alone. And
the change I'm talking about is between how the Prime Minister talked about this 6 months ago versus what he's actually doing right now.
I want to bring this down 25,000 feet because to me, the politics of this that are most dangerous for the Prime Minister are this. Scott, pay attention to me. Here's the deal, right? Canadians fucking hate Trump. They hate Trump like they've hated no U.S. leader, including W, ever, right? They hate Trump. The impression you would get from, say, this past week, if you're a Canadian watching TV, is that Carney likes Trump. And that Trump likes Carney. They're buds. They hang out. They talk. They kibitz. They laugh at each other's jokes. So, isn't that politically very dangerous?
Yeah, it could be at some point. I think the Canadians have, and maybe I'm fooling myself, but I think the Canadians have like very sophisticated radar on this, though.
You do.
I mean, I do actually. When people complain and say, "Oh my God, why isn't he getting any results? What the hell? Where are the results? Carney's supposed to be the world's best negotiator." I think a lot of Canadians go, "Well, hold the phone." I don't know. I don't know that it can be expected that anyone can just secure some kind of deal that would actually withstand scrutiny from this guy. So I think we're picking someone to do his best, not necessarily get a hardline result. I also think when people see him laughing or nodding his head along with Trump, I think that a lot of Canadians, maybe not all, but I think a lot of Canadians also go, man, that's the fucking agony he has to endure in order to, protect the public interest. The easiest thing for a prime minister to do would be to say, hey, it's prime minister, not president. Okay. Shit for brains. Can you get it straight? Like, could you show some fucking respect? Like, that would be satisfying beyond all belief, I imagine, to do. Like, could you imagine how wickedly satisfying that would be? But then you wake up the next day and it turns out like whole portions of the country and your economy have been eradicated by Trump's EO pen. So I think the Canadians get that that they aren't really pals, that he just has to tolerate the son of a bitch and appear to be tolerating him.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that. I do agree. Like that's what the reality is, because it's not like people are just watching Carney and Trump. Like people watch Trump and Zelensky, and they fuck you, show some respect. I'm going to disagree with your false statements about everything from how the war began. Like to have listened to Trump at certain points. Ukraine invaded Russia, right? It's absurd. It's absurd and false. But trying to challenge him on that, sitting on in the hot seat in the Oval Office late night talk show that Trump has created to invite on world leaders as guests, etc. You saw how that goes. Like, leaders of lesser countries, like, and not lesser that, you're less important, but lesser in terms of not having the world's largest military and the world's largest economy and all of that. Like, you don't get to go in and bully the president of the United States in the way that the president of the United States gets to bully other people. sadly. Like that's just real politic. And Zelensky doesn't have the luxury of having some moment of catharsis by scolding the president, when his country is being bombarded and he needs weapons. You may not like it, but you got to play that game a little bit. I don't think there's anyone who thinks that Carney is feeling good about those interactions with Trump. Any more than I think any other leader that Canada would be feeling good about what that situation is. But I think they're just realities in how much we can do to them versus how much they can do to us that are just as true as the sun coming up in the morning.
Well, I really hope you two are right. I really hope you two are right. But my spidey sense is tingling on this because when I watch it, I fucking hate it.
Yeah.
And I know everything you are saying in spades. I know it intellectually in my bones, what you're saying. And I still fucking hate it.
I think you're right. You're right about what the dynamic is. But I think that there's a nuance. I think Canadians are willing to tolerate that in exchange for progress, in exchange for gaining something. And the problem that Carney has is that second piece isn't happening. So
we have the best trade arrangements of anyone in the world
but
right
fuck,
now.
Kory,
so
like
where
show me the
better?
Canadian voter who thinks of themselves as a G7 comparator. Like they don't.
Yeah,
okay?
well,
And they don't. And for the people who are staring down job loss or unemployment and instability in their, like the unemployment is fucking 10% in Windsor. Like this is a real thing. And the problem is for Carney, you can go and you can kiss the ring and people can understand that as a necessary thing in order to achieve a certain outcome, but there is no outcome coming. There is nothing coming. And so the problem is then it just looks like he's weak. It just looks like he's participating in this charade. And I do think that Canadians will run out of patience with it.
I don't agree that nothing's coming. I don't agree that nothing's coming.
Well, we'll see.
But I do agree that if nothing comes, that's a problem. But I suspect that agreements are coming. I'm not sure all of those agreements are going to be to the liking of Canadians, though. And we've talked about some areas where it's not. But I think there are going to be other agreements that Canadians might like a lot, depending on where you are in the country. Like Alberta is not going to be upset if the Keystone XL pipeline goes ahead. I agree with your comments, Jordan, that's kind of swimming in the opposite direction of diversification of our trade. But will that be popular in parts of the country? Goddamn right it will be. But what's coming down the pipe for Ottawa's, no one's going to sell that in Windsor successfully.
Right. Scott, you want to say something, then I want to move on?
Well, I mean, I guess isn't the plan, and I don't know if this is the right plan, but I can't off the top of my head, like a smart, I'll come up with a better one. Isn't the truth of the plan this? Isn't the truth of the plan to hold off on doing something that provokes an even more harmful response from the White House and that allows us the best possible chance of preserving CUSMA, or at least preserving market access to the U.S. as much as possible, whether that's through CUSMA or whether it's through some renegotiated bilateral deal, because that's what they insist on. So that's objective number one. Objective number two, or part of the plan, step two in the plan, is do what you can domestically with the public treasury, which is going to run you afoul of deficits, but do what you can to support those industries beyond that are targeted for action. So it's steel, aluminum, it will be autos, forests, we're forgetting timber, three, generate some benefits where possible. So if there's a harmony around Keystone, there's a harmony around some energy, take advantage of that because A, it provides some economic dividend, and B, it might provide some bilateral goodwill dividend in terms of the White House. Probably not because the guy is a prick. And then finally, you have to bet on time and truth. You have to bet on the hope that the impossibility of dismantling the auto sector in North America begins to exert itself. I'm not counting on Chuck Schumer and the midterms and the Democrats. I'm just betting that the impossibility of actually dismantling what it means in terms of loss of jobs, increase of price of cars, all of that starts to hurt itself, exert itself on it. And so you wait out accepting a shit deal on a rushed and panicked tone. And yeah, throughout all of this, you're having to kind of tread water, make trade-offs, subject yourself to the suggestion that you're too cozy with Trump,
It's a minority government.
Well,
Your runway
I
is
don't know how
vanishingly short.
I don't know what I'm just, that to me is what I see as a plan, and it's not explicitly articulated because you can't explicitly articulate that without opening yourself up to the allegation that it's not good enough, it's not strong enough, it's not belligerent enough. But a stronger, more belligerent, more vociferous plan might not be possible without causing severe harm to our interests.
All right, let's stick with you. Move on to our last topic really quickly. Let's just do a quick round on this. Scott, you're the least conflicted of the three panelists on this question. So we'll start with you, which is Tonda Charles was sniffing around and she got wind of Steve McKinnon and Don Davies talking about topping up the NDP financing. They lost official party status and therefore they lost a shitload of money for research and caucus services and a bunch of other stuff. And there is apparently some negotiations going on that might result in them getting some more money and presumably would result in them offering some stability to the government. What do you think? Good idea?
It depends exactly on what the idea is. I'm sorry, Jordan, you're going to have to cover your ears because this will cause you to truly hate me. I think we need to keep them on the IV drip, right? Like I think you want the NDP, if you're looking at it from a crass partisan self-interest perspective of the government,
which I am.
Right.
I like that you guys think that I somehow would ever believe that you don't have as your number
I know
one
that
project
deep down
the
you
death
think
of the
David and I are
NDP.
adorable and kind. But keep them on the drip, right? Which means give them just enough resources and so forth in order to just secure their absence from the vote so that the math works in your favor on near-term votes in the House of Commons. And you're not forced into election when you don't want it. But don't give them enough resources. Don't make the drip so full of vitamins and life-generating drugs that you allow them to resuscitate past the 12%, which is really what you want to hold them to in the public opinion terms. So it's a delicate balance. If Steve McKinnon can pull that off, I'll be the first to send him a giant cookie, chocolate chip, oatmeal, whatever his heart desires.
All right. Very good. Kory, you looked at the same situation in Ontario and you made a decision.
Well, as a conservative, if you're talking about what do I think about in Ontario every morning when I wake up, so what good deed can I do for the NDP today? What issue can we put out there that despite their normal ineptitude, their normal ineptitude,
you were fruitful in the last week, Kory.
like the ineptitude of the NDP to not go on, say, bike lanes, which I've spent so much time working on that for them.
He constructed that Trojan horse so carefully.
It's not a Trojan horse. See, this is why the NDP always fucking lose. They can't even act in their own best interest. But thankfully there are others out there who are trying to help them out. And if they're smart, they're conservatives. What do we not do? We don't do attack ad campaigns on the NDP to drive them into single digits. No, for conservatives, the conservatives should probably be sending the NDP money. Like, fuck what the liberals do. They should take, $5 million a year out of their coffers and write a check to the NDP because, beyond, the stupidity of ignoring Trump in the opening weeks of the campaign and in that period where the liberals were leaderless, the second biggest fuck up that the conservatives had during the last election cycle was to destroy the NDP. Like, why did the conservatives win in 2011, a majority government, despite having, fewer votes than they got in 2015 when they got thrown out of office? It's called the NDP being up in the polls. You need to have a vote split if you're the conservatives. So, fuck what, I think Scott's probably right. If you're the liberals, you want them on an IV drip because you want a polarized electorate with the liberals on one side and the conservatives on the other. But if you're the conservatives, you want to have a healthy, vibrant NDP that's doing well. And so the more that we can do for the NDP, the better. The better.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Oh, I don't know. You have a prop. I can't. I'm distracted. What's happening?
I was going to say, because when the Conservatives get to run against the NDP, it's like this drumstick hitting a piece of skin. It's just
Just sounds right.
sounds right.
Sounds right. Yeah, well, listen, and let me be clear. I fully endorse what Kory is saying, particularly if the NDP over the course of their federal leadership race manages to reinvent and reorient themselves as a party that's actually connecting with working class voters, then I think then we have a real fight on our hands. And that otherwise very solid strategy on Kory's part could yield some unexpected challenges for the Conservatives. But look,
Should they take money in exchange for supporting the government?
No, they shouldn't take money in exchange for supporting the government. And I actually don't think that that's even really possible because of how the money would have to get to them. And for very boring reasons that have to do with how the BOIE works, you would need multi-party or all-party support to get that through. The NDP is not on the BOIE, so you need a bunch of parties to hold hands around this idea. So I don't think it's not even possible for them to exchange it for budget support, nor do I think that they should. But I would say, I think that for the Liberals, particularly for the long-term health of their minority government, it's probably a smart investment to have some stability for the NDP. They have no real incentive to whip their votes around anything for the government at this point because they have no resources to really track them or do anything like that. So a little bit of money here is probably beneficial for the government in terms of buying the option of some stability there. But I don't think that the NDP can or even should trade budget support for it. I think that we're just too late in the game for that.
Aren't you being too technical? Aren't you being too much of a process demon when you say there's no possible way for them to do with the Board of Internal Economy? Can't Don Davies and Steve McKinnon both carry black nondescript briefcases to dinner at Les Fougères? And when they sit, they both place their briefcases on the ground. And when they leave, they take the briefcase the other brought in. And when Don Davies opens his briefcase, it just happens to be filled with $100 bills.
Like it makes me want to run the opposite direction. Yeah. Right. No, I don't think the NDP should do that. And I think, to be clear, the way the government has set up this budget, there is no way that they can support it. There's no way. And there's probably not even any way that they can be the ones to allow it to pass because the government has made no effort to tee this up in any way that would make it remotely politically palatable, let alone attractive to the NDP to have any hand in passing it. So I think the ship has sailed on that one, but I still think it's probably a smart move on the government's part for the long-term health and stability of their government.
All right, let's wrap it up. Mr. Pinsent, can you find the audience?
You think they left as soon as I said BYE?
I think
that used to be a site of a lot of very interesting things, guys.
People think this is a podcast, an audible recording of Bleak House by Dickens. It's so happy.
Yeah.
It's a Canadian political podcast in the age of Trump. What do you want from us? We're doing what we can.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's got a Hey You?
Oh, I do.
Oh, do it.
Oh,
I do. And I'm going to pick up on what we were talking about earlier around the government's challenges about the trade fight with the United States. And I want to zoom in on something. There are many things, to be clear, in that fight that are completely out of their control. But there are some things that are, and they're fucking it up. And I want to take, I am really going to pick on Jolie's interview on CTV as a like core example of this. So I think that one of the biggest problems that you're seeing from the Carney government and how they're communicating about this fight with the Americans is that they have slipped into this managerial technocrat fucking consultancy speak when they talk around it. Everything is nothing to see here. Everything is on track. They have evacuated the urgency of the fight in how they talk about it. They have completely, it has left the room. There is no urgency. There's no urgency in how they talk about it. Now, I can understand about why when you are having specific discussions around what the Americans are saying, fine. All right, you want to lower the temperature on that with the US, that's fine. but you should not be lowering the temperature around the impacts on Canadians. And what Jolie did in that interview, and I've seen other ministers do it, and I've seen the Prime Minister also have this tone, is minimize what Canadians are going through. So Vashi was there. She was asking her about the fact that, you know, Canada's economy is contracting fastest in the G7. You want to talk about comparators? There's one for you. You know, we have high unemployment. I would add to that, by the way, that we have a new record high level of inequality in Canada. Some people are making out very well in this circumstance, but it's not most Canadians. You have huge struggles still with affordability. And all of these, by the way, cut along generational lines, which is something this government should think about. And when Jolie was asked about this, her response was to talk about, well, you know, there were 60,000 more jobs created in September, and things are really tough, and we're actually doing great given the circumstance. That is the complete fucking wrong answer. People are feeling this. People are worried. They are scared. They are seeing this struggle already in their lives, and they are worried about what's to come. And we know it's going to get worse. And the fact that this government has completely deleted urgency from their vocabulary around these challenges is absolutely an own goal. They should seem seized of these challenges for Canadians. And they're starting to sound like late-term Justin Trudeau government when it comes to how they're speaking about the challenges that ordinary Canadians are facing in this economic moment, and it's going to get them killed. That's my hey you.
Good hey you. All right. Scott, what do you got?
I have a I got a 1.5 hey you this week because I have my sincere and full hey you goes to the government. Tick and talk. We are, as of today, 3 weeks from the tabling of the federal budget. You have a job to do to explain to Canadians why the deficit must be as large as it is surely going to be. And I don't think that people have yet swallowed what the size of that whale is going to be, to mix my metaphor. And I think they need to start a vigorous campaign of pre-budget announcements. And the way to link the cause of the deficit with Donald Trump is to do announcements that reinforce and remind us of the costs of fighting this trade war. So I would be doing more announcements, re-announcing program supports that have been in place already for, say, steel and aluminum. I'd be announcing other expenditures that are related to helping timber, trade supports, others. Canola, if we can't say yes to China on eliminating EVs, then we're going to have to boost our support for the canola farmers. So do that. Link these things and be constantly saying this is the cause of the pressure on the public treasury. And even as we are going to be outlining cuts that we must make to where we can elsewhere, we are doing this. And defense and the 2%, that's been off the radar for a long time. Not everybody digs it, but people have accepted it. It's a must expenditure and that it will cost a lot. Start hammering us with those big, huge numbers so that they're constantly linked to Donald Trump to try to precondition what this deficit figure is going to be. It can't be contextualized the day of the budget by the finance minister. It can't. So that's my first thing. My second little half thing is, why, Justin Trudeau, are you wearing pants when you are making out with Katy Perry on a yacht? She's wearing a swimsuit. You are wearing pants. Something doesn't add up here. Dude.
Why do you want to be wearing less? I don't want to be wearing less. Why do you want him to be wearing less?
Like
what's going on?
The obvious reason is RFK Jr., who is making lots of news about wearing jeans when he works out. So I assume it's just because of the natural
I do
affinity.
not accept that as the obvious answer. I think that is the worst answer.
I
want an explanation that is organic to the moment. What is going on with those two that they make out? She's barely clad and he is wearing denim. It makes no sense.
Yeah. It's one of the many mysteries we're going to ponder on this podcast.
I kissed a prime minister and I liked it. Come on, we need more details. This is the only good distraction of the whole goddamn miserable world.
Yeah,
it's about the only way I like seeing Trudeau in the news is like some celebrity bullshit.
Oh my God, leave this poor man alone. I wish I was private.
I think Scott was left shark.
Yeah, right. I'm going to do one about Newfoundland and Labrador. They're going to the polls tonight. We didn't talk about it on the show today, but I will be watching the results come in, and we'll see whether John Hogan is able to get the Liberals reelected, or whether Tony Wakeham, who I'm a big fan of, is able to pull it off and have an upset. So let's see what happens. But hopefully we'll have something next week to talk about on that.
Right.
Danny Williams with the balls to take out street side advertising on the issue at Churchill Falls. Talk about returning to the scene of the crime. I hope that the vote is an indirect repudiation of everything about that guy who I've long loathed.
Yeah, well, that's probably one of the few points of
out.
commonality between the Martin Liberals and the Harper Conservatives was Danny Williams is a tough dude to deal with.
Yeah, that's one way of describing it. Yeah. So yeah, my hey you goes out to Beth Burke of the Canada America Business Council, and to Goldie Hyder of the Business Council of Canada. You know what I don't need to hear? I don't need to hear business representatives telling Canadians to calm the fuck down, or Canadians to take this with a happier smile on their face. I understand why individual businesses, are not standing up to Trump, because Trump is prepared to use the power of the U.S. government to damage anybody that gets in his way. So it is difficult, if not irresponsible, for individual businesses. But last week, Goldie Hyder told us that we should listen to the U.S. ambassador more, and that he had some important things for Canadians to understand. And this week, Beth Burke, whose whole organization is supposed to stand for the Canada-U.S. relationship, and they have said nothing, not one thing negative about Donald Trump and his tariffs or his economic policies. He does an interview and attacks Doug Ford for being too aggressive with the Americans, for talking too tough with the Americans. Well, I don't think Doug Ford's a very good premier, and I don't like him as premier, and I didn't want to be premier, but I like what he's doing on this, and I like his tone a lot more than I like the Canada-U.S. Business Council's tone. So those of you who actually represent business interests but don't have actual businesses at stake should be defending the system that was put in place at businesses' request for maximum efficiency and maximum economic opportunity and growth. And it's outrageous to me that you people are such quislings, that you talk down to Canadians and defend Donald Trump. So that pisses me off.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Awesome.
All right, that's enough for today. Thank you three for being here. Thank all of the accursed out there who watched or listened to this show, and thank all the sponsors, and I guess I have to say all the sponsors for this show. And we'll see you next week. Hopefully, come back. We'll be funny. Take care of yourselves.